Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. We're riding here today without our host, unfortunately. Nate couldn't be with us, but back on the ACC team previews again. Hoping to finish those up this week. If you guys have watched any of the first 8 and have liked what you've seen, please give us a like and subscribe. Really appreciate all the support you guys have given us. But we'll jump right into it. As you can see here, Florida State is what we're starting with today. Cody, I guess we'll start on the offensive side of the ball. Where do you see the strengths in Florida State's offensive game?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of turnover with this team, and particularly with the coaching staff. Leonard Hamilton is out the door. It was at this point, it was probably time for him to walk out the door. But we have Louck coming in, who was a former player here, has been an NBA assistant. Hopefully he's going to bring more of a modern style of offense to Florida State next season. And, I think at the very least, we're going to see like similar pace from this team. I think they're going to want to run quite a bit. And I just think overall, I think pace and space is going to be really emphasized in this Louck's offense. And, Hamilton teams have loved to run. I think we see the same thing here. And I think overall this roster I think it fits like Florida State's style with the high level athleticism and length that they're bringing in this season. It's like led by guys like on the perimeter and Rob McCray coming from Jacksonville, Kobe McGee from Drexel, and Lejai Jones coming from St. Bonaventure. And I think there's going to be athletes at all 5 positions, at least with the top 8 or 9 guys on this roster. So I think we're going to see a similar roster build at least. And I think we see a pretty high level transition offense right away, with, an upgrade at the point guard position with Rob McCray coming in, and then Martin Somerville coming from UMass Lowell, who had a really good first year in the America East. And I think his game is probably ready to translate right away. I think, but the real difference with this roster, the real difference with this year's roster, from the last couple of years at Florida State with Hamilton, I think is the spacing. Guys like I mentioned, like Kobe McGee, Jones, Chauncey Wiggins coming from Clemson, and Martin Somerville, I think create more of an open floor than we've seen with past Florida State teams. All 4 of these guys shot 36.5% or better from 3 on at least 3.5 attempts. I think McGee is especially elite as a shooter. He shot at 44% on nearly 6 attempts per game. And I think he's going to be the spot up movement shooter and has a little bit of an off the bounce game to really, give this Florida State offense a new dimension.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key here with this Florida State team is that they have, like you said, multiple guys that can shoot the ball at a high level, which is a little bit different from like maybe teams in years past that solely were like transition oriented, just athletes. Now I think they have a little bit of that, but also have the ability to space the floor. Like you said, with McGee at almost 44%, Jones at just about 38, Wiggins, 37%. Somerville right around 39. I mean, obviously McCray, that's kind of a weak point in his game, like 32.6% last year from 3. But I think he's going to be the one, obviously, as you briefly mentioned, like that's going to be creating a lot of opportunities for others, right? And in his ability to pass the ball, which last year I believe he was like 32% in assist rate. So I think that's where this Florida State team is going to be able to thrive, different from maybe the last few years, is their ability to space it. Like you said, they're going to look to run, but they're going to play with a lot of space and be able to, pretty much have 3 or 4 guys on the floor at all times that can shoot a 3 at a very high clip. Very, very beneficial. I think in terms of like weaknesses, like I mentioned, Rob McCray is going to be kind of their primary on-ball creator. Somerville's probably next. I'm not super high on like Jones or McGee as like on-ball creators for others. We saw McGee a little bit at Drexel, like be able to get off the bounce and create for himself. I do think he has some of that in his game, and I think he has some growth for that in his game, especially in a system that's going to have a bunch of guys that can shoot around him. So I think maybe we see their ability to create for others go up a little bit. But I think for the most part, like I'm a little bit skeptical aside from McCray and Somerville, assuming that things translate, which I think, like you said, I think it will. Their on-ball creation of like Jones and McGee would be one thing that I'm a little bit weary of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm a little worried about it, but I think the spacing is really gonna help mask some of that stuff, and the amount that they play in transition is going to help with that as well. And I do think this is an improved half court offense than what we've seen in the past. I don't think it's going to be an elite offense by any means, because I do have a couple of concerns. Like, I guess ball security is probably the biggest issue. Like, yeah. I do think McCray and Somerville are explosive creators, and I think there's going to be times where they play a lot together. But they haven't, like, McCray hasn't been like the most sure-handed guy with the ball throughout his career, and if he doesn't have like a stable ball handler by his side, because Somerville's not going to be able to play like all the minutes next to him. It's going to be a lot of McGee, who's more off-ball shooter, like will create a little bit in the secondary game. But I could see some things getting dicey in that area, and like across the entire roster. I guess those are, like, McCray and Somerville, the only ball handlers that I really trust, because they have some depth concerns as well. There's a lot of uncertainty, like really at every position depth wise. I think the wings is probably the most like sure thing about this roster, but backcourt and front court is where there's a little bit of an issue. And it's just, I think another issue that I have is what are they going to do at the center position? It looks like, the D2 transfer, Alex Steen, coming from Florida Southern, is probably going to start at the 5. And while I do think he's going to provide, a solid offensive rebounding ability, I think there is some skill to his game, like particularly in the short roll. I do have concerns with like some of his rim scoring ability. Kind of, struggled to, like, he doesn't have like the best burst out there, and he kind of struggled to score against like D2 level physicality at times up front. Like when he met his match, he sort of struggled up front, and then behind him, there's not really a ton of proven depth, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Like guys like Alir Malouk, who was here last season, played 11 minutes a game, didn't provide much on the offensive side. And then Shaheen Muhammad from UMass, he's more of a defense first big. So there are some concerns with what they're going to do up front next year.
Yeah. I mean, the main concern I had was the turnovers. McCray, his turnover rate overall for his career is right around 19%, 21% last year. Obviously the assist rate is, through the roof as well. But you look at his top 50 quality games sample size. Well, it's only a 9-game sample size for his career over 3 years. It's like a 24 to 25% turnover rate in those games. And, playing at Florida State now, you're in a power conference, you're going to see top 50 teams almost every night, or pretty close to it. So I think ball security is certainly a big issue. Hopefully, the spacing can help with that, where, you're not getting as much defensive help side coming over, getting in the passing lanes, because they have to stay out on shooters and honor that. So maybe that helps a little bit, but it's definitely a big concern, I think. So that's the offensive side. As for the defensive side, Cody, I guess what strengths do you see in this Florida State defense?
Yeah, I mean, I think this side of the ball looks a little bit more like a Leonard Hamilton team. I think they're going to be extremely switchable. A starting lineup of McCray, McGee, Jones, Wiggins, and Steen, I think, creates for a heavy switching defense that allow it's very similar to Hamilton's philosophy and roster build. It looks like they're probably going to implement a similar style. They're going to press at a high level. They're going to try to deny the rim, probably switch ball screens, high hedge ball screens, and try to optimize, forcing some turnovers next season, which I know Florida State fans are familiar with their defenses. And I mean, one guy that stands out for me is Lajai Jones. I think he's especially elite on the side of the floor. His combo of size and lateral quickness. I think it allows him to guard really 1 through 4 with competence, and I think he can do it at a pretty high level. We had a 16% defensive rebound rate, 3.5% block rate, and 2.8% steal rate. There's just on and off the ball qualities that are going to fit in perfectly with this defense. And Rob McCray, he's a bigger guard, 6'4". I think he can, really take opposing offenses and opposing point guards out of their game, take some teams out of their sets. He had a 2.8% steal rate and a 2.6% block rate as a guard is rather impressive. And he's going to fit in perfectly with a more heavy press style. I'm not completely sure how often we're going to see this team pick up 94 feet, but I do think they have the roster to do so. And like I mentioned, they're going to force turnovers at a high clip. I mean, Hamilton teams have always done that. And I think they're going to be probably a top 50 to 75 unit nationally in this area, and probably a top 2 to 3 Big East team when it comes to forcing turnovers.
Yeah. I definitely see that. I see, like you said, versatility, I think, jumps off the page, as it typically does at Florida State. Obviously, new regime, but that seems to be ringing true yet again. Obviously, like you mentioned on the offensive side, the uncertainty in the front court. But I do think there is some on the defensive end. There's some upside on this side, much more than the offensive side. The rim protection upside, I think, is there. Particularly, we have the numbers more so than for Steen. The 2 D1 guys coming over. One Louck, who's there last year, and then Muhammad coming over from UMass. Louck last year, 5% block rate. Muhammad, as you alluded to earlier, much more defensive-minded big, had a 13% block rate, which, it's a very, very impressive number. He's not a great defensive rebounder. Muhammad isn't. He's a 10% defensive rebound rate for a guy that's 6'11", 7 feet. But, his ability to have the upside, I think, at least to alter shots for this team, I think is going to go a long ways, especially with a unit in the backcourt that's able to pretty much switch everything and be super versatile. I think having the upside of some defensive anchors to alter shots at the rim is going to go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, Alex Steen, he's only listed at 6'9", but I mean, I'm willing to bet that he has pretty close to a 7-foot wingspan, if not a little bit more. He has true rim protection ability. And then you mentioned Muhammad. Obviously, he's going to be a high level rim protector, and that this is your typical Florida State big that Leonard Hamilton had as well. Just super lanky, super athletic, and can block shots and really can come out of nowhere and just send a shot into the stands. So I think we're going to see very similar things there. And then, yeah, I think it's fair. I don't think this team's going to be great on the defensive glass, but I do think their ability to protect the rim is going to be able to offset that quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean that was my number one weakness, is their defensive rebounding. I think is a glaring concern. They have a few guys that are 7 feet, but they're going to play, like we've talked about, a switching defense. I think that's going to lead to some mismatches sometimes on the glass. They're going to be trying to force turnovers, which is sometimes going to lead to being out of position. And ultimately, I think that's going to lead to a lot of second chance opportunities for their opponents. So I think that's the one area on the defensive end that I have concern. The other concern isn't really a concern, but more just an uncertainty or something to make note of, is all of these guys that weren't at Florida State last year, with the exception of Chauncey Wiggins, are all transferring up. So it is a big step particularly in the backcourt. All those guys coming from lower level D1 schools or mid majors, and now they're going to be asked to guard ACC level guards. So more of a concern than a weakness. I believe they'll be able to do it, but I think it's just something worthy of noting.
Yeah, my personal opinion, I think they're going to be okay in that regard because I do think they're going to be one of the more athletic and versatile teams in the ACC. So I think their athletic traits are going to be able to play up. I think that would probably create a little bit more of an offensive concern for me than a defensive concern, which is it's a very fair point. And just another weakness I had was just the depth on this roster. Like I mentioned earlier, like after Martin Somerville, who's probably going to be the sixth man on this roster, there's really no proven impacts, and especially at the ACC level. I think not having the depth, I think, could hurt when it comes to Florida State trying to play this like high pressure, fast scheme. So I think that could. I don't know. I don't think Louck's going to take his foot off the gas pedal when it comes to pace. But if he has to play some guys 33, 34 minutes, like I think the pace is just going to naturally slow down a little bit, and this could hurt the value of this team on both sides of the ball a little bit. But besides that, I don't have a ton of concerns with this defense besides the depth, and it is a front court group that may foul a little bit too often, which could force them to go deep into their bench. It could even force them to play a little bit of small ball with Wiggins at the 5, which I'm not really sure how that would go on the defensive side of the ball. He's not really much of a rim protector. I think that'd be more help out the spacing on the offensive end, create a real 5-out offensive group there. But yeah, there's definitely their concerns, but this is overall, I think, a team that I'm a little bit higher on than the consensus.
Yeah. So shifting now, MVP, X Factor, Cody, who do you have?
For MVP, I went with Lejai Jones. I think he does a little bit too much on both sides of the ball to not be the guy here. I think he fits right in with this projected system that we're going to see. His off-ball shooting is going to be really important, and his ability to impact the game in pretty much every area besides like actual on-ball creation, I think is going to be super valuable for this team. I could have made him the X factor as well, but ultimately I ended up going with Rob McCray. I think his creation is going to be pretty imperative for this team to kind of reach their offensive ceiling. He's going to be the guy getting into the lane consistently and having to make decisions for others. And while he's a great rim scorer, he's a high volume rim scorer. He had some issues last season, so we're going to need to see that come to fruition at the ACC level. Like he's a good athlete and creative finisher at the rim, but we just didn't really see the numbers at Jacksonville last season. Whether that was the talent and shooting that he had around him that was a little bit lacking. Maybe this extra spacing is really going to help him out. But I think his playmaking and decision making is going to be the biggest key for the Seminoles next year.
Yeah. Similarly for me, I had Lejai Jones as MVP as well. My X factor, I actually had 2 though. I went Rob McCray and Martin Somerville. I think like for similar reasons, both of them are going to be relied upon pretty heavily to generate, open looks, generate offense for everyone else. The team should shoot it at a high clip like we've talked about. But I think it's going to be incredibly dependent on Somerville and McCray to generate those opportunities and to really push the pace in transition. So that's why I went with both. I think both are going to be incredibly important to the offensive success of the Seminoles, which kind of leads us into wrapping things up here. Cody, ceiling and floor of Florida State, what do you see for them?
I have the ceiling a little bit higher than I think a lot of people would. I think this team at its peak is a surefire tournament team. I think they could be not like 5-6 seed range by any means, but I do think I could see them being on that 8-9 line with, just the more modern offense coming in next season. And I think Louck did a great job building a roster for his first year coming into college hoops. So yeah, I could easily see them being on the 8-9 line, and especially with the defensive versatility that they have. But in turn, I could see the bottom kind of falling out here with the depth concerns if they don't figure out the center position early enough into the season, and if a guy like Alex Steen doesn't translate up as well as I think on at least the defensive side of the ball, then I do think there could be some serious issues there. So I mean, their floor is like definitely no tournament, like no postseason really at all. Like they could completely slide out and they wouldn't even be in an IT team. Just, if guys go down early in the season and they're just not able to pick it up, like even at the guard spot, like if McRae or Somerville goes down, like the replacement value is much worse than I think Seminole fans are going to like.
And how about a bold prediction?
I mean, I guess my bold prediction is this team does make the tournament, barring they stay healthy. I think that's more of an unpopular opinion. I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking this team next year. And, I really like the individual pieces on this roster. You're bringing in a longtime NBA assistant coach who, prioritizes pace and space, like we mentioned. And I do think there's a real ceiling here.
Yeah. For me, I think, to me, they're really in that middle of the pack of like high end, like 7th seed in the ACC, sneak into the back end of the tournament. Low end, I feel like they're not really going to do worse than like 12th, maybe. Maybe that's, obviously it could be worse, but I think like assuming health, right? That's how we always take into consideration here. These guys should be no worse than 12th, in my opinion. Like there's too much shooting. There's too much versatility. I think, they can't really do worse than that. As for bold prediction for myself, I think in Louck's first 3 years, we see a Florida State top 4 finish in the ACC. It's not going to be this year, so it's going to be in one of the next 2 years. For anyone that's like listened to any of our podcasts so far, like I've been really high on like the NBA to college transition, particularly like what we saw last year with Kevin Young, and what has been kind of attracted there to BYU, the way that they play, kind of the schemes that they have put in place on the offensive side in particular. I think we're going to see some similar stuff at Florida State. And I think we're going to see that start to happen more across the country. Are these assistants that go to big time college programs and, are very successful. So I think Florida State in the next few years is going to be a really good team again, like we saw, 6-7 years ago when they were a 3 seed, I think, in March Madness.
Yeah, and I think that COVID year they were supposed to be like a top 2 seed as well. So I mean, I do think there's a real ceiling there, and that was without those teams having like an elite offense. Those teams were super defense heavy. So yeah, I do. If Louck is able to create some traction here in year one, like I think it was an impressive recruiting job. I do think this is an attractive style to play for, and he can potentially grab some top recruits and some top transfers to come in within the next couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll wrap things up here with Florida State. Stay tuned for more ACC team previews.